The next segment of our video is on the hand-trawled stone finish. What we're going to do is we're basically going to skim out the floor, tape out our pattern, and then trawl the stone texture on. Better known in the industry as hook trawling. We've mixed up our mix right here with 3.5 to 4 quarts of modifier. That's the consistency that we're going to mix up in order to get the stone texture. We've already taped out this floor in a slate pattern. The next step is to basically trawl our finish on. What we're going to do is show you guys how to get that stone texture with your trawl. A lot of the dealers have questions on, well, how do you achieve that texture without getting it so thick? This whole system, when said and done, is about as thick as a nickel is laying flat. With that, we're going to put on our knee pads and get to work. Nice new knee pads. Only when making the videos do you get the new stuff. This texture is a texture we're going to duplicate over the slate pattern that we've taped out. We took advantage yesterday of some time and actually taped out a stone pattern on this side and trawled our finish over the top. Now what we're going to do is go to the side behind me and actually trawl out the texture. Remember, we've mixed this mix up at about 3.5 to 4 quarts per 5 in order to get the consistency that we're looking for. What you don't want to do is float this product on too thickly. We actually trawl it out fairly thin, but the finished look gives you the look of real stone and of depth. Now, as you can see, where I've trawled, if you can barely see the reveal of the tape coming through, that's actually what you're looking for. Then you take your trawl, stick it out there, and pull it up slightly and pull. To give you an idea of the depth of the product that we've trawled down, you can zoom in on that line. That's about as thick as a dime is laying flat, so we're really not floating on a whole lot of material. The part that I really want to get across to the dealers when doing this is the actual hook trawling. A lot of guys are in question on how to get that actual texture. So again, once you've spread your material out so you can see about where your tape lines are, you lay your trawl flat, pull it up to form a slight suction, and it creates your texture. You can see where the tape lines are before we actually do the hook trawl system. And again, you want to keep in mind, that's the thickness of the product. You're not floating on a bunch of material. Once you've trawled it out to where you can see your tape lines, you know you've got a nice thin layer down there, lay your trawl flat. There's going to be X amount of sling on the bottom of the trawl. Lay your trawl flat and pull up. Giving you that stone-like finish. It doesn't take a whole lot of muscle or a whole lot of pressure to get this look. In fact, the less pressure you put on it, the better. Once you spread the material out, the whole key to this is the actual vacuum or suction. If you can get that right there, that little vacuum is what gives you your texture. You can see the outline of the trawl is left when I pull it straight up. Now, let's spread that back out to where it's smooth and do the same thing. Drop that trawl and pick it up and pull it as you're picking it up in different directions. That's all there is to it. Pick it up as you're going. You don't want to go too uniform with your trawling, not all from side to side. If you notice, I've swirled some this way, some this way, some this way. You want the inconsistencies in your stone finish so it looks natural. All the stones aren't cut the same way when you get them. They all have the same shape or the same size, but the actual texture of the stone is going a different direction. I'll show you what I mean. This way, if you look at this, it's got to sweep this way. I'll trawl this mix out and down my side. Spread it out so I can see my tape. Now, start to trawl. In different directions. Little trick of the trade, when you guys first get started trying stone finishes, something you might want to do is actually skim coat, which we skim coated right here in light Oxford gray and taped out our pattern, but skim coat, believe it or not, in dark gray, and actually trawl dark gray over the top until you get comfortable with how thick your mix needs to be. Like I said, you want to keep it about 3.5 to 4 quarts, but if it's too wet, you can get some bleed. If you trawl your stone finish on in the same color that you skim coated in, you'll never see the bleed that goes underneath the tape. And your stones will look totally different from the grout line due to the fact that you're actually going to color tint the surface. It'll be a different color from your grout. Just a little tip. The next process, once the system is dry, you want to rub brick. And when I say rub brick, not to flatten the texture down, but to knock off any high spots that might be chipped if you're doing an interior, for instance, by a chair, a high heel, or even a piece of heavy furniture that's being moved across the floor. So just lightly take a rub brick and go across the top. You can hear when you come across your tape, again, because the product's so thin, you want to be careful not to rub brick through to your tape, because when you color tint, it can bleed if you're not careful. So make sure when you hear that sound that you don't apply any pressure in those areas, because there's tape underneath. The next process in the job is to actually broom the job down and blow all the dust and debris off. If you're inside, again, doing somebody's kitchen floor or counters, etc., you're probably going to want to use a vacuum and a whisk broom. Once you've trawled the system down, you want to give it at least 2 to 4 hours to dry. In other words, you want the product to be rigid enough for you to walk on and actually rub brick before you start to color tint, which is the next process we're going to show you. Depending on whether you're inside or outside, obviously will depend on your dry time. If you're trawling this system down on a back patio or a walkway or a porch that's outside in direct sunlight, your dry time is going to be reduced to normally about a half hour to 45 minutes. So that by the time you're done trawling and you've gotten everything ready for the next process, it'll be good to go. All right, now that our texture is dry, it's time to move to the next section of the process, which is colorization. How do we do that? We basically take the same product that we skim out. Skim consistency, 5.5 to 6 quarts per bag. We pour it off into separate pails and dye it the color that we need. The colors that we chose for our system today would be platinum gray, forest green, and white. Again, we've mixed them up to skim coat consistency, and we've taken sponges. I've actually taken one sponge and cut it in half for my small ones, for each of these, and I leave a whole one for my last color, which is going to be white. I always make my brightest color my finished color, and I'll show you why as we're going. Another thing, when you're working with the products and you're holding sponges, you obviously want to protect your hands. You can use rubber gloves, like these, any kind of rubber glove will work. You don't want to use a cloth glove because it'll actually absorb the material and wind up staining your hands anyway. So rubber gloves, guys. A light buff as you're going. Very important too, when you're working along a wall, you want to make sure that you cut in along the baseboard. Be sure and put tape and paper along the baseboard to protect it. But when you're working with your colors, one of the common mistakes that's made is they don't get right up next to the wall. And when the job's finished, you can see where the wall or underneath the counter didn't get much coloring. Pay close attention to the edges and the detail where it meets walls or counters. Very important. Again, see these ridge lines? What I'm doing is actually trying to put the darker color down in those ridges. Now, when I come over the top with our next color, it'll just hit the high spots of that ridge, which leaves that green that's embedded down in the grooves, giving it the depth that we're looking for, so it looks like it's much thicker than it actually is. Now, with every color, it actually starts to look better and better. And I'm sure at this point you're going, I hope so. Our second color is platinum gray. We're going to apply it just like we did the first coat, but I'm not going to bury it down in those pores like I did the forest green. I'm basically going to come across and do a buff and hit mostly the high points. Now you can see what I was talking about earlier when I said hitting the high points, leaving the darker color down below. It really makes the texture stand out. Again, holding the sponge, I'm not shoving down on the sponge. I'm holding the sponge very loose, just picking it up. I'm not bending it into a ball. I'm holding it fairly flat and applying a little pressure in the middle. Again, going side to side, back and forth. You really start to see that texture climbing to the top now. Again, giving you the illusion that it's thicker or deeper than it really is. Once you've got your second color on, it's a good idea to actually stand up and walk the project. What we're going to do is we're going to blow all the dust off from us actually sanding with those sponges, get rid of that, and look at the job to make sure I've got enough of each color down before I put my last color tone on, which will be white and is just a highlight. The last color we're going to apply is white. I like to put my brightest color on the top. It's almost like antiquing. It really makes these ridges that you see now stick out a lot more. Keep in mind, when we put our clear seal on here, whichever one we choose, whether it's 270 and 300, 200 or 150, depending on the application, the colors are all going to get stronger. You want to put white on to make those ridges stand out a lot more because the green is going to come back out and be more prevalent. Now, when applying the white, if you notice I've got a full sponge or a whole sponge rather than a half. Reason being is I don't want a whole lot of bend to be in the sponge. I want this sponge to be held real loose. You saw the sponge pop out of my hand earlier. I want to hold it real loose and just hit the high spots. Watch what I'm talking about here. I'm just letting the sponge lay on top and just lightly buffing. You see how it's bringing the ridges out? See the difference and how that just sort of launched out? Look at that as opposed to what's around it. You just want those ridges to stand out. Again, just barely holding the sponge. I stick the sponge down in there, rake all the excess material off of it. I don't want big globs of mix on there. Laying the sponge flat, lightly picking it up, and just buffing over the top surface. Notice that I dip my sponge every 3 to 4 passes. I really want to keep the sponge clean and with a lot of mix or fresh mix on the top. I want to keep the tips of these stones very bright. Just like with your other color, you want to make sure that you stand up and look at the job to make sure you got a nice even tone of the final color. This area right here looked actually a little light. So I'm going to hit those top spots just one more time. Final process is actually removing your pattern tape and revealing your pattern. Like I said, we did a stone texture here. You notice right in here, we still have some of the tape line that's left down, the fiber. You want to make sure that you walk the job and look at your edges very closely, because every now and then there's a few pieces of fiber left that you just want to make sure you pull out before you clear seal. Now that we've pulled the tape on the stone finish, we've broomed it, we've blown it all down, and got it clean and ready for sealer application, we're going to apply the sealer. Today we're actually going to use the 150 sealer because we're in an exterior environment, we've got good airflow, and it's the sealer that we're going to put on the project. Again, keep in mind when it comes to sealers, if you were doing an interior project, if this was a kitchen floor in somebody's home or an office, you would actually put down the ProGlaze 270 and top coat that with the AquaSeal 300 because odor would normally be an issue in those areas. When applying 150 sealer, if this was a walkway or a patio, a porch, or a back terrace, you need to put a minimum of 2 coats of 150. If this were a driveway that we're going to get a lot of vehicular traffic, I would have 2 options. I could opt to put a 3rd coat of 150 on there, so making a total of 3 coats of 150 on the job, or jump to the ProSeal 200, depending on the amount of traffic it was going to get, and put 2 coats of the ProSeal 200 down. Guys, remember, keep in mind, anytime you're using sealers or you've got questions about sealers and applications, always refer to the sealer spec sheet or call the 800 tech service and talk to one of the representatives here at CTI. Today's Tech Tip videos have done 2 things. They've shown you 2 new techniques with a product line you've all currently been using, which is our Hallmark system, our 105 grout, our modifier, and our clear. It's also shown you a new product line, which is the PVA system. We here at CTI are very excited about the PVAs and what they can offer. We encourage you to use the techniques that are on this video to maximize your CTI dealerships.